The other thing with the XCP cabooses, you mentioned the Junico kit. With the TLT.
Thence to the tipple, reloaded on similar or even the same cars, and go out to market. So I think that will make an excellent industry on the end of Fremont layout, perhaps with a mine or a generating station on the other end. The Cisco coke ovens would also make a fascinating module. I'm not much into steel mill modeling, but it's something that's tickling the back of my mind. For a home layout, the glazed bay shop, I think, would make an excellent anchor point for a shelf layout. As you can see, there's a over 270-degree roundhouse here. Most of the bays, though, are quite short, so it would fit in a really small space. The car shop is immediately beside it. You can see the cars being moved into the car shop buildings. They had 1,500 hoppers. They spent a lot of time moving hoppers in and out. I think you could do an interesting section of a small shelf layout just based on the car shops and locomotive shop. If you had a little more space, you could expand that into other parts of the operation. There also are. There's a shot of one of the mines. I'm not sure which mine that is. There's also the more modern wash plant shops, the shops shown here at Victoria Junction. These were built in the early 80s. The wash plant is long gone, but the shop building is still here. They still service locomotives and cars here. That also would make an interesting module, I think. And I think that, for a home or part of a home layout, I think you could do a real interesting miniature coal hauler railroad, resource railroad, using this prototype. This concludes my talk on my current state of my modeling, at least of the Cape Breton Development Corporation Railway. I plan to update this presentation as time goes by and as I get things done. I'd love to have any questions you might have. I'd like to extend thanks especially to Ken Goslett, Caleb Wenzel, Rick Hamilton, Jerry Schaefer, Bill Brillinger at Precision Design Corporation, Jim Abbott at Highwall Graphics, and Bob Tizink at William K. Walters, and all the photographers whose images I had used. If I've got a misattributed photograph, please let me know. I will update it. If you want a photograph removed from this presentation, please let me know. I'll happily do that. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Will. That was very, very well done and interesting. I'm back with Greg and Douglas, and I believe we have a few questions for you. Would you like to go ahead, Greg?
Well, I was making notes as you were talking, and every time I made a note with a question, you then answered it. So that makes the questions portion rather boring. However, one thing you did not answer, the tarp modeling, the tarps that you put over the air intakes. You mentioned very quickly that you used lens wipes.
Yes, I wish I had taken a thought. I got to that part of the presentation that I really need to take a photograph of this because I have since installed them. I use to clean my glasses and my phone. I use the alcohol wipes sold at Shoppers Drug Mart, like $3 for 100 or whatever. And what I'll do is I'll take one of those, I'll lay it flat and let all the alcohol evaporate. And I find that the paper material they used is a very lint-free paper, it's lint-free tissue. And I'll cut that to size and fold it up, wrap it with wire, and put it in place on the hangers. Because these were tarps that they'd pull across the air intake to prevent the radiators from freezing up in the winter, just like a tarp on the front of a semi-trailer of a highway tractor.
Yeah. The other thing with the XCP cabooses, you mentioned the Junico kit. Would the TLT work for that as well? The TLT CP van?
Probably, if it's a wooden CP van, it should work. I haven't looked very carefully at it. I started my modeling using the Northeastern vans and the Trenton vans. Ironically, I realized afterwards that most of my fleet are RS1s. The Trenton van doesn't make any sense, but I have one now, so yeah.
Well, that's
I will look into the TLT van because that would certainly be easier to source than the Junico.
Yeah,
and cheaper than the brass.
Definitely, yeah. And there's a couple of resin ones too. Of course, Sylvan did one, and I think yeah, the other one, Caslow has one in stock still.
Clearly, I should have consulted one of you CP modelers before I did this presentation.
Well, that's all right. You're forgiven. Excellent.
Okay, Douglas, do you have any questions for Will?
Well, I'm just sort of wondering from a track plan perspective, Will, I understand here you might sort of have a layout going from Sydney to Glaze Bay, but would the railway go beyond, into the main Scotia and maybe, up to Truro?
No, the Devco Railway was it connected
Cape
to
Breton and Central Nova
Sydney,
Scotia Railway at some point.
At Sydney, it connected to CN at the time, and then later Cape Breton Central Nova Scotia Railway. And one thing I neglected to mention is they were very much not interchange focused. Up until 1987, they almost never interchanged. Coal went to the power plants in Cape Breton or the steel mill in Sydney. And even the power plants in Cape Breton were generally the ones that were on Devco's rails until the 80s when Nova Scotia Power did their conversion. At that point, they started to interline. That's when they needed new cars. And one thing that is hilarious about the Devco Railway is their reporting mark, their AAR reporting mark is DVR, Delta Victor Romeo. I have never seen a photograph or any evidence of that reporting mark ever being applied to a piece of equipment. Every single piece of equipment that they had as a reporting mark of DR, Delta Romeo, which is the AAR reporting mark of the Dardanelle and Roseville Railway in the United States, and has been that for 140 years, which I think is just hilarious. They've never used their own reporting mark on anything. They used somebody else's the entire time the railway existed. And they got away with it because the only time that a piece of DEVCO equipment was ever interchanged was either being brought in from the car works, so they knew where it was going, or going to CN to go as no further away than Trent. So I think it's just an aspect of the railroad that makes it even funnier. They never use their own reporting mark.
Well, it's funny you mention that because the Intercolonial Railway started out with the reporting mark ICR and found that their equipment was disappearing to the Illinois Central, I believe, and they had to change it to the IRC.
Yep.
And then they got absorbed into CN. So I guess your guys got lucky there.
Well, there's got to, it never occurred to them to ask anybody because they were not interlined.
Well, I have a question about the Snowplow 32. You mentioned you weren't sure of the heritage of it. The front of it looks like an older style CN design for branch line use. Did you see any comparisons to that?
I have not dug deeply into this subject yet because I was focusing on the more everyday equipment first. It is entirely possible, and I'm going to start by looking at the Better Rail. David Bedard does a 3D printed double-ended plow, and I think that would be a good place to start in any case, because the most difficult part of a plow to build is always the blade. So no matter what you start with, if you've got a double-ended set of blades for a double-ended plow, you're off to a good beginning, I think.
And of course, the double-ended plow is at the New Brunswick Railway Museum in Hillsborough, but it's not the same as the one in your photo. I think the one in your photo could be earlier. But interesting part of the hobby is the research. I have another question. I think you briefly mentioned something about Pacific Western Rail Systems hoppers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
PWRS offered a 4,000 cubic foot marine industry coal gondola that was made by North American Railcar Corporation for them. And that model is a good match for the DEVCO 4,000 cubic foot hoppers. It's built with the same design. They were built by Marine Industries, but they used the Marine Industry design.
So if somebody was starting out and maybe hadn't yet built up enough kit bashing experience, that would be a very good place to start.
Yes, it would. And if you wanted to do a stand-in for some reason, or you were space constrained, you might also consider taking the Walters Ortner ballast car. They have a 4-bay Ortner ballast car. It is not going to pass for a Hawker Siddeley or NSC rapid discharge hopper, but it is the correct bay configuration, but it's only 4 bays and they're smaller. So if you want to do a small layout, those cars, you could probably fit 3 of those where you'd fit 2 of the others. So that's another option a person could do if they wanted to do the modeling, to do model DEVCO without kit bashing the cars. These cars, they do take a certain amount of time to do, but that is, that's my thing, of course. So that's definitely an option.
And I understand that you've already started a module or 2 on this theme. Can you just talk very briefly on your plans so far?
Yeah, I have a plan right at hand to show you, but I have started with, just look and see what I have here in my DEVCO folder. Because I have started on an 8-foot modular scene featuring a wash plant based on the Sydney Mines wash plant. Let's see if I've got a track plan here. There it is. I think that's it. And I will share that in a moment. So right here, your screen. So this is the plan for my Fremo modules. I have already constructed the one end, the yard ladder. So all the switches but 2 have been laid, and all this track work has been laid. So this is designed to fit on one end of a Fremo layout. This track will go all the way through like a Fremo main, but is intended to be used as a yard track at the end of the layout. And cars will come in here into an arrival track. The locomotive can escape through here. A local switching locomotive is based in a shed here. then processes the cars through the dumper and there's room for a second cut of cars on the dumper track. There'll be a pile of coal in this area with a conveyor over to the wash plant. The wash plant will have a tipple and a departure track there. So cars will come in through this track, get processed through here, pushed over to the tipple to be filled with clean coal and shipped out again, with a space here to build a powerhouse or some other structure. So this will end up a 2-foot by 8-foot layout, and I'm planning to build for the other end of the layout a power generating station. Currently, I've looked at Glace Bay, I've looked at Lingan, I've also looked at Trenton. That's a much more modern plant that would fit the cars I've built better. And those cars did go to Trenton from 1987 up until 2015 or 2013 when they stopped sending cars there. They started shipping coal in other ways. The coal, originally the Devco Railway serviced the coal pier I mentioned, and that pier was used to receive import coal, which was subsequently sent to the generating stations. So you'd see Devco cars going through that way. And but as the situation evolved and they realized they were going to probably lose the Sydney subdivision, Nova Scotia Power built a coal pier at Port Tupper so they could receive coal directly there, and CBNS now carries that coal to Trenton. Whereas what used to be the Devco Railway now carries coal strictly from the unloading pier to Lingan, to the power station.
Well, that's a very good example of how the type of research you've done is directly translatable into a practical model railway. Thank you.
So. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we'll wrap up. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Will, for a most interesting presentation. And clearly anybody watching should have lots of inspiration for building a practical model railway. And I'd like to thank Douglas and Greg for being here today, and especially Greg for being our control room guy and making this recording possible. So thank you very much, and we'll say goodbye for now, and that's it for today.
We had some technical difficulty there, starting a new stream. Will, there's a few questions.
Okay.
If you be willing to help us out. Someone asked, are there any pictures of your layout? But before we go there, did you actually start building this modular layout?
I have started building modules. I belong to a Fremo inspired club in the region. We're Fremo compatible, but not Fremo compliant is the best way I could put it. And I started building some modules for that because I don't currently have the space for a home layout. And I do have a space earmarked in the future, but I haven't yet settled what I'm doing with it. I'm considering doing a small Devco layout, but in the meantime, I've started to do some modules to start doing some key scenes and get a feel for it.
Cool.
And I have done quite a bit since September on that.
So how many modules do you expect to have done by the end?
By the end, the first scene is 2 modules, and the staging module is a third, each of them a 4-footer. I figure I'm going to build at least 2 more scenes, each 2 modules, so at least 16 more feet of modules to put on different portions of the modular layout, so the coal traffic can flow between the mines, the wash plant, and the power generating stations. So you'd have the cycle is mine run coal fresh out of the ground, gets loaded in hoppers at the mine, gets transported to the wash plant, cycled through the wash plant, sent to the power generating station, and then from the generating station, the empties go back to the mine.
So that was a power generation station at some point, I think, when the video froze up with all this piping next to it.
Yeah, there are several generating stations I have in mind. One that the 2 that I'm considering most carefully, one no longer exists, but the other one still does. There's a modern generating station in Trenton, Nova Scotia, which is on the Cape Breton and Central Nova Scotia Railway, which is the other railroad I model. So I might do that because that speaks to kind of my roots. But there's another generating station in a location called Glace Bay. It was called the I don't have one here. It was called the Seaboard Generating Station. It was near the waterfront of the city, and it's a much smaller station, so it might
Hmm.
be more suited to a module. But currently, I'm leaning towards Trenton because it's it's in the late 80s, and it reflects the equipment that I'm modeling.
So if you do
Whereas the other
glaze,
generating station would be 2 bay hoppers.
if you do
Sorry.
the glaze bay one, you're going to put all that piping in that was like half the size of the building.
Um, I'm considering it. That's one aspect of Trenton that's appealing is that there's a large substation there, but there isn't the massive pipes. Everything's enclosed. There are
Okay.
conveyors going every which way because they also used to bring in, and there's some piping because they used to bring in oil fuel by barge. That's what they did
Uh-huh.
in Glace Bay as well for a while. But the overwhelming history of that generating station's been coal. So
Cool. And so this will be DCC, I assume.
yes, I run. Our group runs DCC. I personally use an NCE power cab with a booster by Tam Valley Depot,
Cool.
excellent booster. That gives me 2 districts, a 2.5 amp district from the power cab with an EV1 breaker on it, and the booster gives me another 5 amp district. And we find that the smaller Fremo layouts that we do, we tend to run layouts that are maybe 60 feet long.
Okay.
That works well for us. We run over JMRI with with
Oh,
with a Wi-Fi to connect throttles, phone devices running Y throttle or engine driver, and that
cool.
works very well for us. I do really like the Wi-Fi throttles that I've seen from TCS,
Yes.
but I mean I've got several old Android devices sitting here that don't have anything else to do, so far I've just done that because as a friend of mine summed it up. He said I like the TCS throttle a lot more than a touchscreen, but I like the touchscreen a lot more than a full function throttle in my hand. So
Right.
we'll see.
Yeah. No, nobody's getting paid here. No disclaimer, but that TCS
No, I mean
50E throttle is the best in my world.
yeah, I think it's really nice, and I mean, I use North Coast now. I used to use Lens. I still have a Lens system here somewhere. I've used
Wow.
Digitrax. I use all these systems.
Cool. Now, I have a suspicion you were working on some engines while we were watching the video. Is that related to the modules?
Well, yes, the engines will be powering the trains that go between the modules. So I have a selection of locomotives. The main power of the period that I'm interested in is the Alco locomotives, most of which did not have MU capability, which
Okay.
restricted their train size, and that's a perfect fit for a modular layout
Correct.
because one RS1 and a dozen coal hoppers is a
Uh-huh.
perfect train for our layout.
Yes.
And I built the modules so the coal wash plant is actually designed. I figured out the tonnage of a dozen coal hoppers, and I designed everything around a train of 10 to 12 coal hoppers coming in and going out. And like the coal bin that I build will be a 2,000 to 2,500 ton bin, which
Hmm.
reflects 2 full loads
Oh
of
yeah.
a dozen cars,
Yeah.
2 full trains. And then the plant itself will account for another probably 1,000 tons in process at any given time. So there's not a
Cool.
huge coal pile. This is a bin because now the later wash plant had a mammoth coal pile, but it's just impractical to model it on modules.
Cool. Okay. Back to the first question. You mind sharing a photo of the
Certainly,
progress?
certainly, Brad. I'm going to share my screen here. So I'm going to grab a window. I want that one, and I'll zoom it in a little bit. Actually, first I will bring it up. Where am I at? That should be full screen now. So these are my first 2 modules. This is what I refer to as Albion Mines currently. That's the working title I have for it. It would take too long to explain. It's a fictionalized version of the wash plant that stood in Sydney Mines in Cape Breton.
Hmm.
But the period that I'm modeling, I'm still working out. You can see I'm working with mock-up buildings here. I'm still working out how to position the aesthetic of the plant. I'd like to have the more modern equipment they had at the Victoria Junction plant, but as I said, it's kind of prohibitively large. So I may make this a late 70s appearance, which will reflect most of the period that the Sydney Mines wash plant operated. They did not do much updating on that plant. So it really was in up until the 80s, and even past that, it was a real time capsule in terms of the physical infrastructure that was in place. I can show that a little more. with a similar wash plant here. This is actually the wash plant that I've named the modules after. It's not a Devco wash plant, but it's geographically close by, and I remember this plant still standing into the 1980s. This is the Acadia Coal Wash Plant in Lords, Nova Scotia,
Uh-huh.
which, for those that have never been there, it's between New Glasgow and Stellarton, which are two communities in Pictou County in central mainland Nova Scotia. This wash plant operated for many years, almost 100 years.
Oh, wow.
Um, it started out servicing a mine that was right around here that was called the Allen Shaft, which had a disastrous accident
Oh,
about
no.
100 years ago and was sealed. There's a monument to it now. This site is all industrial now. This is if you know the Sobeys company, the grocery company in Canada,
Yep.
their headquarters built their headquarters building and their soft drink bottling plant occupy this property now and have
Oh,
for some
okay.
time.
Okay. So no more coal in the whole area at all?
Um, Cape Breton coal. There is very little mining left in Nova Scotia of coal. There is one open mine in Pictou County still functioning, but it's winding down. And there is one mine that was dug in the 1980s in Cape Breton called Duncan. And Duncan was opened officially for production of less than 10 years ago, finally.
Oh, wow.
But it has not produced any significant amount of coal. They've had a lot of problems with rockfall. They've had a lot of problems with process. It's the first underground coal mine to have operated in Nova Scotia in 20 years,
Oh, wow.
and it's reflected that a lot of the knowledge bases just no longer exist.
Yeah.
And in the 1990s, near this site, a new mine was opened in 1991 called West Ray. That's a name that's infamous to Eastern Canadians. They
Okay.
had it in their first year of operation. They had a disastrous explosion. They killed 26 men due to corporate malfeasance and cutting of corners.
Oh,
And
no.
that wound is still very raw in Pictou County. When they opened the open mine in Pictou County, that was one of the reasons they got to do it, was they were opening an open mine, not an underground mine, because this
Okay.
coal seam has a reputation. It has a lot of methane, and it's a dangerous seam to mine. It always was.
Ouch.
That the Allen shaft I mentioned, the explosion that finally closed it was at least the third explosion they had. And
Wow.
the West Ray mine, when it opened, as soon as they opened, there were rumblings about how they were running it and how the operators who were not native to Nova Scotia did not understand. And anybody who had mined coal in Nova Scotia could have told them that it's a dangerous seam.
Not
So
cool.
in the early 2000s, the last pit in Cape Breton closed, and actually the coal export dock in Whitney Pier was converted for importing coal.
Oh,
and
okay.
and they actually the Sydney Coal Railway, the successor to Devco Railway, is now landlocked, but they do still operate. They haul coal from that pier to the power plants in Cape Breton Island, or at least in
Okay.
industrial Cape Breton and the Sydney area. The the coal plant, the fired plant in Point Tupper that used to be serviced with Devco coal is now serviced via ship using its own import pier, and that import pier they load coal there now at that power generating station to ship to Trenton for them to burn, because it's easier to get coal in a ship into Point Tupper than it is to get it into Trenton.
I think we need to do a whole clinic just about coal.
I've been digging into this subject, and you could spend a lot of time on the moving and handling of coal in general, and in every geography's got its unique attributes,
Hmm.
and Nova Scotia is no exception. There were
Okay.
three major coal mining areas in Nova Scotia, four actually, if you count Inverness County, which is where I actually grew up. Um, there were four distinct types of mining being done in Nova Scotia over the years. The
Wow.
world heard about our worst mining disaster in the 1950s in Spring Hill. That's a very
Okay.
famous disaster. They haven't mined coal in Spring Hill since the 50s, but between Cumberland County, Pictou County, Inverness County, and Cape Breton County, there was a lot of coal dug in this province. It was the
Wow.
backbone of our economy for a long, long time, which is why Devco was created in the first place, because they extended the life of this industry by 40 years.
Oh,
It
wow.
was ready to pull the plug in 1962 or 1967, sorry.
Wow.
And instead, there was a lot of back and forth politically about whether that was the right thing to do at the federal or provincial levels, because the federal government was keeping the development corporation going, and the provincial government was keeping the steel mill in Sydney going. But the fact remains that these industries were the cornerstone of the economy of a good chunk of the province of Nova Scotia. A lot of people had skin in this game,
Wow.
and with, as I mentioned in the clinic, the Yom Kippur War in 1973 caused a reflection upon whether it was the right idea to phase out coal so quickly, and they actually they changed over some oil-fired plants to coal burning that are still burning coal because of that, to decrease dependence on OPEC. And at the same time, there were agreements signed between Canada and the United States to make sure there was never another oil crisis.
Yeah. Well, Will, that was very, very insightful. Thank you very much. I'm always happy to see smaller branch line like smaller layouts and railroads being modeled. Not that I have anything against the oops, you were left against the big railroads. So thank you, Will, in his absence. We'll take a small break and then we'll bring Ed on for the next clinic. Welcome back to the March edition of NMRAx. I'm Speed at the bottom of the helix. Our next clinician has been a member of the NMRA, the National Railway Historical Society, and the Ontario and Western Railway Historical Society for over 50 years. He's currently serving as a board member of the Sunrise Trail Division, NMRA, and as the president of the Long Island Sunrise Trail Chapter, NRHS. He's currently a member of the new trolley operator class at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. If you're in the vicinity of Main Street in Washington, Pennsylvania on April 5 or 6, 2025, you might see him passing by at a grade crossing. Please welcome Ed Killer.
Thank you very much, Speed. Glad to be here. I think my introduction says just about enough. And today is the 68th anniversary of the shutdown of the New York, Ontario, and Western Railway. So let's explore this almost mythical New York State and Pennsylvania line. March 29th, 1957, the last day for the New York, Ontario, and Western. The New York, Ontario, and Western was organized on January 21st, 1880 to take over from the bankrupt New York and Oswego Midland. Trackage extended from Middletown, New York to Oswego, New York. It opened from Weehawken through to Oswego on June 4th, 1883, using newly built trackage and trackage rights over the New York Central's what became the New York Central's West Shore line. During 1904, the New Haven became the majority shareholder. The New York, Ontario, and Western filed for bankruptcy on May 19, 1937, and was thereafter operated by a trustee. The bankruptcy court ordered it shut down by April 1st, 1957. And here's a map circa 1943 of the line. And we're going to go over the line from Weehawken to Norwich. But we've got a little bit extra we'll show you from the section up by Oneida. And I hope you'll enjoy it. And we're going to start at the ferry terminal at West 42nd Street in Manhattan in the Hudson River. Those are 3rd Avenue Railroad trolley cars you see in the foreground. And Weehawken with the 501 and 503, those are both F3s backing onto their train. The 251 and 255 speed through Bogota, New Jersey. Those are both 260s. The 408 speeds along the West Shore. The Cornwall Coal Trestle. This picture is prior to 1906 because of some of the pieces that are in the view. When I got to Cornwall in 1974, only the shell of the powerhouse was left. And if you look carefully in the woods next to the tracks, you could find this stone marker that indicated the boundary between the West Shore and the New York, Ontario, and Western. Cornwall with a P-Class 207 switching. Some of these older pictures have started to fade. And the 227, which is a 460 on Train 1 at Firthcliffe. This is a winter picture because Train 1 during the summer was a huge, huge train. The 324, which is a 280, a mile shy of Little Britain Station. Note the canal snubbing post. When the New York, Ontario, and Western purchased a piece of the Delaware and Hudson Canal between Ellenville and Kingston, it got a whole bunch of these snubbing posts, and they figured out they took them, flattened one side, put the mile marker on it, and they could use them as mileposts. And they appeared all over the line. Burnside, crossing of the Lehigh and Hudson River, which went left to right, and the Ontario and Western is the line you see in the line of ties you see to the right of the image. Campbell Hall, 1965. This was an interchange with the New Haven, the Erie, the New York Central. The station you see here was at the crossing of the Erie and the New York, Ontario, and Western, and it was an Erie-owned building. W Class 306 at Campbell Hall on the connection into the yard. This is the Maybrook Yard, which is fairly well known. And here's Tower O with the 409 crossing the Erie at Campbell Hall. Interesting building, Tower O. It was a New York, Ontario, and Western operated tower. They paid for it. They built it. But the Erie Railroad, because they were the first line on the site, dictated what the tower would look like. This is an standard Erie Railroad design tower. W1 Class 325 in Maybrook Yard. SO test engine. Standard Oil Company approached the Ontario and Western and said, "If we'll pay for an FT if you'll use our lubricating products and give us the test results." So, test engine 601 and another FT in Maybrook Yard. New Haven Engine Terminal in Maybrook in the 50s. In the foreground, you see Lehigh and Hudson River RS3s. Then we have a group of New Haven FA1s. And over in the distance, we have a Ontario and Western FT coupled to one of their F3s. Crystal Run Station, we're heading towards Middletown. At this time, it was a ramshackle boarding house. It was later renovated into a very nice museum, restaurant. Great food. Unfortunately, the kitchen wasn't careful and they set the building on fire and we lost it. Self-cannibalization by the trustee starting in 1937 was used to keep the line going. This was originally the double-track Southern Division, just south of Middletown, and you can see where the other track had been. U1 class number 246 southbound, south of Middletown Main Street. Middletown Main Street was, we'll see that in a moment, but was by this time was basically the home of the Middletown and New Jersey Railroad. And here's Middletown Main Street. It was originally an Erie station that was served on this behind it by the New York Susquehanna and Western, and the Ontario and Western was on this side. You could buy a ticket for one of 3 different railroads at this location. At this location, the Ontario and Western got onto a piece of the Erie for trackage rights. So the track by their headquarters in Middletown, they did not even own. Here's the New York and Oswego Midlands Middletown Wickham